Welcome to the Dom Sub Devotion podcast. Every episode of Dom Sub Devotion is an authentic reflection of our real life in a loving 24/7 DS marriage. If you crave the passion and intensity of a power exchange dynamic inside of a deeply loving and intimate relationship, you've found the right place. You can always find more from us in the show notes and at infinitedevotion.com. Thank you for listening.
Hello and welcome to Dom Sub Devotion. My name is Andrew, and Dom Sub Devotion is a podcast that reflects the real life of 24/7 Dom Sub relationships inside of healthy, loving relationships. And I know a lot of you that listen to this already know that. Some of you might be new here. But the reason that I'm reinforcing that point to start this episode is that the content of this episode, talking about disagreement inside of dynamics, came up after a conversation that I had with, first of all, someone that I realized after the fact was not even a real person. Well, it was a real person behind it, but it was someone who was feeding my words from a conversation into an AI chatbot and then responding back to me with this very inflexible and inhuman approach to the concept of disagreements inside of Dom Sub dynamics. And the point that was being made in this conversation was that structure needs to be put in place to prevent disagreement because disagreement will inevitably break down the dynamic. And while I agree in concept, there's also a deeper truth that we're human beings in power exchange relationships, dominant submissive dynamics, authority transfer relationships, whatever you want to call this and whatever approach you're taking towards it. There are a lot of different ways to do dominance and submission. None of them have to be done in ways that are emotionally unhealthy or destructive. And when we try to wipe out things like disagreement using structure, we can do that for a while, but there is an inevitability to resentment and emotional harm when we don't deal with the humanity of the people involved in these authority transfer, power exchange, dominant submissive dynamics. So some people take this approach because they're very afraid of losing their kink, because the kink can be very intense. It can be very powerful to consider the totality of surrender and the totality of control. And that is possible to experience in a way that does not require emotional self-abandonment and that doesn't build resentment. Because if we avoid the humanity of the people involved in a dominant submissive dynamic in any way, the resentment will eventually be the thing that collapses the entire dynamic and the entire relationship and probably leaves behind emotional scars that are going to be really tough to recover from. So this episode is going to talk about how do we handle disagreement, because the reality of this is we all want relationships that are smooth, that are easy, that everything flows and is just natural. And especially in these power exchange dynamics, when there's a lot of turn on around the idea of being in complete control, when there's a lot of turn on around the idea of being completely submissive, completely taken over, there's a way to do that without having to abandon yourself, without having to be forceful and controlling in the wrong way. So there are many, many ways you can play out your dynamic. And the deepest point of this episode, and the thing that I want you to take away from it, hopefully, is that you can have all of your kink, and also you can treat the other person like a human being. And there's no better way to look at this, or lens to look at this through, than the one of how we handle disagreements. So thank you for joining me this week. And as I walk through this topic, and before I walk through this topic, I also want to point out the importance of the fact that these are human relationships. And so to have them work, we have to be dealing with humanity. And artificial intelligence is showing up in this community so much, so fast, in so many different ways, that I can already see the way that we're losing humanity. It can be really tempting to go to a chatbot that tells you exactly what you want to hear, that will play into your kink, that will give you an echo chamber to reinforce what you already believe when you came to it, because a chatbot will only mirror what you are giving it. And so if, as what happened in this particular conversation, if that chatbot becomes your personality and it loses your own authentic voice, it loses nuance, and especially loses humility, then we have lost the human connection to these relationships and dynamics. And then the only part of this that can ever really be real, which is the human-to-human connection, gets completely squandered in, well, artificial. It's not just artificial intelligence, it's artificial intimacy. It's artificial connection. And I really don't want to see us lose the humanity of this. And so that's what I continue to do and will continue to do here on this podcast and in Infinite Devotion, and everything else that we do is to bring a very real example, to the best of my ability, of human beings living this relationship, because everything that I share, everything that I teach, I always attempt to do it from a place of integrity, meaning I'm reflecting real life experience here. I'm not just talking about a fantasy. I'm not just talking about an idea of a best case scenario. This is shit that I learn by leading my wife, my submissive, who wears my collar 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and has now for 6.5 years. And our dynamic continues to grow. Slowly, intentionally. She continues to grow under the leadership and the guidance and the direction. And again, the way that we do it isn't the way you have to do it. But there are lessons you can take from the way that we have approached this and the reasons that it works so well for us, so that you can bring that into your dynamic, your kink, the way that you want to play this out in your life. And that's what we're here for. So let's talk about disagreements and conflict inside of dominant submissive dynamics. Now let's start with this idea of the perfect alignment. There's a common fantasy that a good dom-sub dynamic or a good power exchange dynamic is defined by complete and total agreement and uninterrupted harmony. And what I want to bring to you here today is the idea that disagreement isn't a flaw, it's actually a feature. It is a path that we can find to a place where we are in a deeper and more total agreement. So everybody wants a relationship, like I said before, that's smooth, that's easy. But we can either force it or we can find our way there for real. One of them takes a little bit more patience, humility, and understanding of what goes on underneath the surface. Everyone at some point has thought, they want a relationship where they never fight, where everyone gets along, where your submissive always trusts you, always obeys, never questions you. Every submissive has thought at some point, I want a dominant who just never loses presence, who's always solid, who's always in charge, who takes control of everything perfectly all the time, so I never have to even question anything. What we're really saying here, though, is I'm afraid of feeling disconnection. But that's not a power exchange relationship. That it's an act. Anytime we're acting in a way that isn't real, meaning there is disagreement, but we're trying to pretend like there's not. Now we're in performance. Disagreement isn't a sign that something is wrong or that you've created a bad structure or that you are a bad submissive. Or if your submissive disagrees with you, it's not a sign that you're a bad dominant. It's just a sign that there's something real going on. Again, this is human relationships. So you've got two people, two histories, two sets of needs, two nervous systems, merging together into one dynamic where we are taking and giving up power. And friction is inevitable. You're going to have conflict. You're going to have disagreement. And if you look at that as a failure rather than as an opportunity, then you're completely missing the point and the path to having that dynamic you really want. So it doesn't matter at all if there's disagreement inside of a dynamic. What matters is what you do with it. Disagreement is like a fork in the road. It's the Y on the path. When you are going through and everything's going smoothly, and then there's a disagreement, that your submissive disagrees with something that you're doing, something you're saying, something you want, or your dominant disagrees with the way that it feels good to you to submit, whatever, there's some sort of conflict. You're going to have to choose one of two directions. You're either going to try to avoid it, suppress it, push that disagreement down, especially because if you're doing so because you said in the contract that this submissive is not allowed to disagree. They have to obey all the time, no matter what. You try to eliminate what's real. It's usually some sort of control where one person or the other is being expected to abandon or erase their own authentic reaction to that experience. The other direction in that fork in the road is where you meet that disagreement with honesty, with presence, and then you rely on structure to create a portal to a greater alignment. So rather than trying to suppress the disagreement, you look at it, you go deeper into it, and then you build something better where you can find connection that doesn't require that disagreement in the future. So what do I mean when I say this? For the dominance, if you think your leadership is only working when she agrees with you, you're really not leading yet. You're still trying to manage her performance. It's like you're trying to direct a play or a musical where she has to say the right lines. She has to dance the right dance and sing the right notes. But that performance isn't ever going to feel real to you. Real leadership is going to not want a false performance, not want somebody to try to act something out that's not really them for so long that they forget who they really were. Leadership, dominance, power, mastery requires misalignment. It needs and expects the times that there's disagreement and builds in space and capacity to hold it. If your authority collapses the moment she says, something doesn't feel right here, that wasn't really authority. It was just power that you built on her self-abandonment. And your job isn't to create a structure where she's not allowed to disagree. It's to create a dynamic where disagreement doesn't threaten the whole frame. It isn't being seen as evidence that the dynamic isn't working or that the structure isn't right. And as a submissive, if you think being a good sub means that you're just always agreeing and that you never disagree, you never argue with what your dominant says, you've mistaken obedience for real submission, false obedience, because healthy surrender requires a nervous system, like a human body and mind that feels safe enough to speak when something's off. If your submission is built on silence or fear or repression, and especially if you have a dominant partner who is telling you that submission means silence and repression. That's not a healthy human relationship. That, like, again, you can play these things out in kink, but kink is different than life. Your voice as a submissive is not a threat to the dynamic. It's a part of what grounds it. It's a valuable piece of information. So if disagreement is inevitable and it's not the problem, what is the problem? It's how you respond. It's what you believe disagreement means. And it's whether your dynamic is really structured in a way that suppresses disagreement or metabolizes it. Disagreement is a critical moment of choice. It's one that reveals the true structure and the integrity of the dynamic. This disagreement isn't the issue. The issue is how you meet it. Disagreement is where leadership is forged, trust is deepened or broken, and where the dynamic either becomes real or it begins to rot under that weight of resentment. You know, what disagreement inside of a power exchange relationship isn't just, I think you're wrong. It's not just a blame. It's a feeling that something isn't right, or a feeling that I don't know if I can trust this, or that I feel unheard or unseen or unsafe right now. And this isn't about who's factually right. We can't always use logic. Again, we're human beings. We have to look at this with some nuance. This is emotional stuff, not just control, not just logic. You can't just get her to agree to something, guys, and then expect that she's going to feel that way all the time. The disagreement is a feeling. And so we have to have the emotional awareness to lead the dynamic in the way that we want it to go. So it's not about who's factually right. It's about how truth is moving through each of you. Disagreement is usually just a signal that something deeper is going on that needs to be looked at. It's not just an argument. It's a doorway. It's that fork in the road. And what you do in that moment determines everything about how your dynamic will work. Every time some tension arises, you're standing at that fork in the road. Again, you have to choose, are you going to suppress the disagreement or are you going to meet it? One path is going to be like, I need to preserve this illusion of harmony. I need to keep the play going until we get to the next act. And the other path deepens the truth of the dynamic, and it allows the dynamic to continue to grow without resentment, without deeper weight to be carried. You know, to the dominant who thinks that disagreement is a problem, it's going to feel like your leadership is only proven when she does what she says. But you're always going to know that she's faking something, that she's pushing through some sort of internal resistance and hesitancy. But really the question is, can you lead? Can you still lead? Can you still hold your inner authority when she challenges the direction? The temptation is always going to be, when you have been granted this kind of authority in a submissive's life, to use force or coercion to gain compliance, or to just shut down, ignore it, and retreat. But if you collapse into needing her approval, or you punish her in some way for using her voice, your frame isn't real. You're just living in a reactive state. And if you need her to agree with you so that you feel dominant enough, you're not leading, you're just playing a game too. For submissives, disagreement doesn't make you disobedient. It's just an honest part of the path through. And this is where Dawn and I have really had to, we've really gotten good at this. This is something I'm so proud of our dynamic for, because Dawn has gotten so good at speaking up when she disagrees, when something doesn't feel right. And that doesn't mean that we don't both want a dynamic that's very harmonious, that's very easy. We both really want a dynamic where there is a complete and total level of control and obedience. That's what we both want. So the moment when she doesn't feel right about something, when I talk about this fork in the road, it's really where I have to sit and look at why. What's the root cause? What's going on underneath the surface that's causing this disagreement? And how can I lead us to a place where we don't continue to have this come up so that we can flow more easily and naturally through this? Because when she disagrees with me, inside of her, she's making a decision for herself. It's something like, am I going to abandon myself and how I feel? Am I going to shut down my real human response, my actual dignified experience, so that I don't upset the apple cart, so that I don't break the structure? If she's that would be like her putting herself in a position of being responsible, being the one who's in control of, is this dynamic going to work because I shut up, or is it going to break because I speak up? So when we can't hold the frame of the dynamic as the dominant, the submissive ends up in a position where she's actually the one in control, because she has to control and lead the whole dynamic by shutting herself up when she's having an authentic feeling response. So if she speaks up, even when it's messy, and shows me what's going on, what her feeling and why she's disagreeing, what's going on inside of her, we can find what's actually real, what's actually true in there. So when Dawn speaks from her truth, from and again, the truth being what she's feeling in that moment, and she's not trying to control herself, she's not trying to avoid making a mistake or screwing something up, she actually strengthens our dynamic. She actually brings something better to it. It's when she withholds her truth. It's when she shuts down her authentic feeling, even when that feeling is a disagreement, even when that goes against the structure that we both desire to have for this relationship. What's going to happen is, inside of her, one little brick in the wall of resentment is going to get placed there. You don't get to avoid that just because of a contract. You don't get to avoid resentment building because, you agreed to obey all the time. Well, then if she disagrees with you, but she obeys anyway, she just abandoned herself and put a brick in the wall of resentment. She started to build internal distrust for herself and for you because she couldn't bring what was real. And so we end up with this fake agreement, right? If Dawn comes to me and disagrees with something, but she doesn't speak up for it, and she goes along with it anyway, it's a fake. She's faking it. She's not being a good submissive. She's faking it. And that creates a debt, like an energetic debt in her system that's going to have to be paid later. That resentment is going to come up somewhere else. So her voice isn't a weapon. It's not something she's using to attack or break the dynamic. It is a mirror. It's reflecting a reality of something she's feeling that might have something to do with me or the dynamic or the structure, or it might have something to do with something from far back in her history, in her past. This is why I talk so much about healing our inner child. It's why I talk so much about this deep work inside of these power exchange dynamics, because the feeling responses are going to come up, and we can either shut them down or we can work with them. When I let Dawn's voice show me where my leadership needs to grow, and then I actually allow myself to grow rather than just tell her to shut up, then I get to be better. I get to be better for myself. I get to be a better dominant. I get to be a better master. I get to be a better sir. And I get to be a better man. And so she, in the ways that she feels me off, out of integrity, they're actually very big gifts to me. And if I don't listen to that, there's a real cost to making her suppress herself so that she doesn't make me uncomfortable. First of all, what it will do, and what it has done in the past, is really deep disconnection from her erotic aliveness. If she's faking her emotional experience, she's also faking her sexual experience to some extent, because that resentment shows up in other places, and it will show up in the bedroom for sure. So then the kink scenes, then the sex and all of the fun that we want out of this dynamic, that's the whole point of this anyway, is to have a better connection, better passion, and deeper intimacy. If we're building resentment with the way that we handle disagreement, it's going to show up in sexual disconnection. It's going to show up in little ways that she lashes out, or she has to try to control little things. It'll show up somewhere. There's a cost to it. And when we insist on not faking it, when we insist on our submissives bringing their disagreement to us, when Dawn does that, what it leads to eventually is more trust, more turn on, and more clarity in our dominant submissive roles. Because we're able to work through it rather than just ignore it. Most power exchange couples fear disagreement because they never learned how to survive disagreements without breaking connection. It feels like it's breaking the dynamic, it's breaking the connection. But the reality is this is a skill you can build. And it's core to any authority-based power exchange dynamic, is the ability to metabolize these disagreements and turn them into the things that deepen the dynamic and build trust. So the real question is not how do we avoid disagreements? It's how do we build a structure that knows what to do when it happens? There's a difference between this fragile, fear-based kind of control and a relational leadership and authority that can hold resistance without collapsing. Because if you think you're in control because she never disagrees, you're really not in control at all. You're just in denial. Any authority-based, polarity-driven, power exchange relationship, disagreement is not just inevitable. It needs to be anticipated. The means by which we deal with disagreement just needs to be baked into the structure itself. If you design your dynamic with this in mind, the disagreements become a source of refinement and deeper trust, not rupture. But without that structure, the relationship will either become authoritarian or just emotionally chaotic, or eventually what they all will do is collapse. They'll fall apart. And this is the reason why, by the way, if you look around and see how many deep authority-based dominant submissive dynamics last decades, there's very few, very, very few. Why? This is why. This is exactly why. And this is how you have a relationship and a dynamic that works over the long term. Again, however you want to do it, you can have anything you want in that dynamic. You can do this in whatever way you choose. There is, one of the things people like to say as an insult in the BDSM community is oh, you think there's just the one true way, like it's some kind of an insult. Well, there are a million ways to do power exchange dynamics. They're all unique because the people are all unique, but none of the ways require emotional damage and suppression if you're willing to really hear this lesson that I'm teaching here today. There's this myth that if the dominant is strong enough and aligned enough and present enough and solid enough, that the submissive just will never question him. It's false. It's just not real. All authority gets tested. All submission will encounter some resistance, because resistance is a part of the nervous system's processing of opening and surrender. And if you don't account for this, you either demonize disagreement, like this conversation that kind of spurred this episode, or you just get blindsided by it when it shows up. Real authority isn't going to fear this resistance. It's just going to anticipate it and be designed to hold it. Structure in an authority-based dominant submissive dynamic isn't just roles, it's not just rituals, it's not just rules. It's the entire container for how you relate to each other. It's the process for how power moves between you. And it is the expectations around how we handle truth, how we handle repair, how we recalibrate things when things are off. The way that Dawn and I handle this is if something feels off, the expectation that I have of her is that she speaks up and shares it as soon as she is able to vocalize it to me. I expect her to bring disagreement forward cleanly and, again, as expeditiously as possible. Now, this means that sometimes during the big triggers, the explosions, the collapses, again, those natural human experiences, that's not the time always because it's not clear. Now, if I can listen, if I can let her be in that experience and listen to it, I can learn a lot from it. And by hearing what she is feeling, by really gathering the information that she's having from the experience that she's having, I can lead us better. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm giving in to what she wants all the time. I am the leader in this dynamic. I am the dominant. She is the submissive. And I will get the final say. But I will hear her concerns. This is trust building. So when something feels off, rather than using structure to suppress what's off and get back to the way it's supposed to be as fast as possible, our structure allows for and requires that we push a pause button, that we just take a moment and look at what's going on when we feel off so that I can help us realign and then move forward. But if your relationship doesn't have a process for disagreement, then your whole structure is an illusion because it's only working when things are going well. So you need structure to help you and support you through your disagreements. Without it, every time that your submissive disagrees with you, it'll feel like an attack on your authority or that your submissive is being bad. And then you're going to react with force or with shutdown, or you're going to punish her for having a real human experience. If you don't have the structure right, the submissive then is going to end up withholding her truth. She's going to end up withholding how she really feels. She's going to walk on eggshells. And then eventually she's going to erupt and blow up. And again, then, if you as a dominant don't have a structure set up to handle these things, she's going to erupt and blow up because she's been suppressing herself to try to force herself into your structure. And then her blow up is going to feel like an attack on you. You're going to react. You're going to punish her. And then you've created this cycle where the only way for the dynamic to work is for her to shut up, shut down, and go along with what you say, even if it's against her own inner voice. And then you end up with resentment, you end up with tension, you end up with inconsistency, you end up with people pulling away and thinking, well, this just doesn't work for me, or maybe these dominant submissive dynamics just don't work at all. They do. You just have to have the structure that allows for the integration of the reason behind the power struggles. So this isn't about inviting or encouraging unrestrained chaos. It's about expecting that there are going to be chaotic moments and being prepared with the structure of your dynamic to metabolize them into an improved level of trust, which ends in deeper safety for the submissive, which ends in a deeper obedience and submission without resentment. So how do you do this? You can do things like taking a moment every week. I encourage in my course, Structuring Your DS Dynamic, I encourage every new couple in a dominant submissive dynamic to use a ritual where you have a weekly check-in, where once a week, ideally if you're living together, you get out of the house, but you meet in a neutral location. You turn off the roles of dominant submissive and you talk as humans. What's going well? What did I do well this week? Was there a place that I could have shown up better? Give me feedback as the dominant so that I can make sure that I'm being received in the way that's intended. Where are you feeling resistance? What's feeling hard for you? What do you want to be able to follow through on, but it's actually feeling challenging to do it? Having these moments where you step outside of the dynamic isn't a failure in the dynamic. It's actually an opportunity to deepen it. Also, I believe this came from Dan and Dawn Williams' book, Living MS, talking about porch time. For us, we just say pause. And we take a moment. Usually for us, when we pause, we go lay down on the bed. It's just kind of the safe space. We go lay down on a bed and we hash out whatever it is. Whatever needs to be said gets said. So these are for the moments in the day-to-day when something is just feeling not quite right and it needs to be dealt with. It needs to be at least expressed. So she feels heard. So I have an opportunity to know what's going on with her. Because again, you will feel when your woman is off emotionally. Every man does this. Every man has this sensitivity to his woman's feeling. And you're opening this up rather than shutting it down. So when she feels off, pause. Pause the dynamic. Come here. Maybe she gets on her knees. Maybe she lays down next to you in bed, which is what we do. And I listen. I don't try to fix anything. I don't try to change anything. I don't try to do anything other than really know, learn, hear, and see what's going on with you. And then we keep going. Then we generally have a ritual that involves Dawn getting down on her knees, looking up at me, making a commitment to me to be mine, and me making a commitment to her to lead her from truth. Physical contact, eye contact, gratitude, whatever it is that you need to come back into connection. And then as the dominant, you just learn from that experience. You define and set up ways for these disagreements to be brought forth so that they can be integrated. What's going on underneath the surface here? Just don't try to eliminate resistance. Plan for it. Build for it so you can lead through it. And you don't, as the dominant, you don't have to get this right all the time. You don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to stay in some sort of integrity and openness when things get messy. And for the submissive, you don't have to hold back your truth to stay safe. The real safety is in trusting yourself enough to speak up. I talked about this in episode 90. The structure itself is what holds you. And when it's clear and when it's consistent, you can let go. So when this is done well, structure, rather than limiting freedom, it creates openness. It creates the safety that makes it possible to get to a place where the submissive feels free enough to let go of the reasons that she might resist or disagree or fight back. So structure is going to become one of two things. It's either going to be suppressive or it is going to be freedom-inducing. So what happens then? What can we make possible when we meet disagreement with presence instead of panic and fear? What happens when leadership and dominance stays grounded? What happens when the submissive speaks up with clarity and love? Let's talk about what disagreement reveals and how to use those moments to create an even deeper, more passionate, and more intense power exchange. Disagreement is not a detour from the dynamic. That is the biggest lesson from this whole episode. Disagreement doesn't mean the dynamic has failed. It's revealing a misalignment. It's revealing an unresolved tension. It's revealing a fear that might have been hidden below the surface, that now something happened and brought that to the surface. So when we can hold that consciously, that disagreement becomes a diagnostic moment. It becomes an opportunity to show you what's unspoken, or where trust might be incomplete, or where the dynamic needs to evolve, or where the submissive is clinging to something, or where the dominant is out of integrity. There's something that can be diagnosed from the fact that this comes up. So the disagreement in this framework, in a power exchange dynamic, isn't a problem, it's a symptom. It's not a problem, it's a symptom. The disagreement is rarely, if ever, about what it seems to be about. It's usually just a surface level thing. What's underneath is the misalignment. What's underneath it is a lack of clarity in what the dominant's role is or the submissive's expectations are. It might be an unmet need. It might be residue from a past hurt that has nothing to do with what's going on right now, or a fear that hasn't yet been resolved. The current moment disagreement is the smoke. The real work here is in finding the fire, so you can put the fire out, so that this doesn't keep coming up, because it will. If you keep just trying to blow the smoke away, the fire underneath it, the reason that the smoke is there, is still going to keep burning, and you won't get to a point where the dynamic can actually feel fluid and easy. But if you're only responding to what's being said, you're going to miss what's really being revealed. A disagreement reveals a weak point in your structure. It's almost like if you build a house and it's wobbling, there's a weak point in the structure somewhere. It's showing you where the agreements aren't clear, where the dynamic isn't clear, where the frame is maybe too rigid or too loose. It's probably highlighting something where one or both of you are outsourcing leadership, or withholding some truth, or managing something, managing each other, controlling each other in some way. There's a really positive effect if you're not afraid of disagreement. And that is that disagreement will show you where the dynamic is ready to evolve, where there's something deeper available. Because if this comes up, it's evidence of something that's been there all along. And when you can, I've used this word a few times in this episode already, when you can metabolize that, when you can integrate the reason that the disagreement showed up in the first place, now you've resolved an underlying tension that you maybe didn't even know was there. And then all of a sudden, her desire gets bigger. All of a sudden, as the dominant, you have an even deeper feeling of honest, grounded solidity in a way that you didn't before the disagreement. So in the repair from the disagreements, in the repair from the fractures or the ruptures, you end up being able to navigate tension better. You build the skill. Every time that we meet one of these ruptures with presence, there's a deeper level of trust. So the goal isn't to avoid misalignment, it's just to become masterful in that repair process. So you have to use the disagreements as a tool. Ask better questions, right? When Dawn has something that flares up and she's getting upset, or she doesn't like the way that I'm doing something, or she's unhappy with something with the way the dynamic is working, I ask myself, what's underneath this? What's going on inside of her? What's the part of me that feels threatened? What is this whole thing, like what's being asked of us here? And slow down. We have to, as the dominant in this situation, we have to slow down. We have to listen. We cannot react. Do not have an immediate emotional reaction. Take a break. Take a deep breath. Feel the weight of that moment and really sit with the questions of what's going on here before you respond. And use it to clarify the dynamic. Use it to update the agreements. Use it to examine the structure. Is there something that needs to go differently here to make this work better? Or is there some like I said before, unresolved fear or unfelt pain. What needs attention? There's a hidden question in every one of these ruptures or disagreements, and it's, do you still see me? Can I still trust you? And when it's handled well, on the other side of this, you deepen the devotion, you deepen the connection, and then therefore the ability for the power exchange, the authority transfer to feel more real. There's more trust, there's more transparency, there's more respect, authentically, not forced, not performative. So if a disagreement is this rich, if it can show us this truth, if it can refine our structure and reveal where we're ready to go and grow, then the big question is, how do we build a process for meeting disagreement together without fear, without collapse? So what do we do when it happens? You have to, again, bake into your structure an agreed upon protocol for navigating these moments. Expect them, plan for them, and welcome them. What's the action we can take? Again, you're not failing when you disagree. You're failing when you don't know what to do about it. Most dom-sub couples either avoid conflict until it explodes, or they get stuck in it without any clear path forward, and that's why these dynamics end up not working over the long term. You don't need forced perfection. You need a shared system for repair that allows the dynamic to grow because of the conflict. So, there's a realignment protocol I'm going to share with you. Do not take this as a script. Take this protocol as a practice that you can integrate in a way that fits for you. The first step is pausing the spiral. When either one of you, dominant or submissive, feels something off, either one of you can call it. For Dawn and I, we just say, I'm going to press pause right now. And this doesn't mean avoidance. It means we're shifting into deeper awareness, out of reactivity and into patience. The second step is I lead this. First, I ask her, tell me what's true for you right now. What are you experiencing? What are you feeling? What do you need me to know? No blaming, no posturing, no attack here. Nobody's making anyone right or wrong. I shut up and I listen to whatever she has to say. Then I speak. I always speak last. So everything gets put out on the table. And again, generally, this means we've gone and laid down on the bed. Or sometimes, depending on the situation, I may have Dawn on her knees in front of me. But generally, this is a pause in the entire dynamic. So usually this is like, okay, now we're just Andrew and Dawn. We're not dom-sub. We're not anything else. We're sorting out what's going on here. So the first step, again, is you pause it. You name it, you call it. The second step is you both take turns speaking without interruption, interjection, to really just be heard. The third step to this is you identify the signal, not just the noise or the story. So this is the dominant's role, is to take this information and look underneath the words. Is this a need for safety? Is this a broken agreement? Is this a place where I was out of integrity? Is this a place where she's reacting to fear? Is this her actually needing more attention? And I speak to her and say, here's what I'm hearing, here's what I'm seeing. And I give her an opportunity to reflect. Again, I hear her, I listen to her, even if I don't like what she has to say, especially if I don't like what she has to say, because my goal is to resolve the reason for the rupture, not to get out of it as fast as possible. So listen. Try to get to a point where I can name and identify what is the fire that's burning, not just what's the smoke that we're seeing. Once we've gotten to that, and I have the information that I need about what's going on underneath the surface, I will always reaffirm that she's mine. You're still mine. I've still got you. I will bring her to her knees in front of me, and I will generally stroke her hair, kiss her forehead. I will reaffirm her and tell her that I'm grateful that she brought this to me. And then if I'm ready in that moment, I'll speak it there. If I'm not, I will bring it later. And bring to her what we're going to do, how we are going to move forward to resolve this conflict, to resolve this disagreement, not just in the moment, but ideally so that we don't have to keep having it. And I know when I've gotten to the deepest truth because I will always feel her soften back into me. That's when I know that she's feeling heard, held, when she's feeling that she has come back into trust, back into surrender. And then we move forward. Then we reconnect. Then we move forward, and then it's up to me to deliver on the promises of integrating whatever it is that caused that disagreement in the first place. And when we approach it this way, what we have found over and over, like repeatedly, is that sometimes these things will come up a couple of times, and then eventually they will just fade away, and we don't have that disagreement anymore. And that's why we have such a harmonious dynamic, and it's why our dynamic continues to work and get better, deeper, kinkier, more fun after 6.5 years, after like 14 years of marriage. Our relationship and our dom-sub dynamic only gets better with time because of the way that we handle these things. And when I share this approach to dealing with conflict or disagreement, some people will say, well, this feels a little bit too structured. It has to be structured. The structure is what is providing the solid edge for the chaos to melt into. I need to provide that structure, and her chaos needs to subside. But her chaos can't subside until there's something solid enough for her to let go. So the structure has to be there in how you integrate and how you work through these things. Another resistance or argument that I'll hear from people about approaching it this way is that in the heat of the moment, we're going to forget this, or it's not going to feel possible. That is why you need it. That's why either person can call this out and call that pause. Or, I'll also hear people ask, like, what if one person refuses? What if, I say pause, and then as the submissive, for example, what if I say pause and my dominant refuses to come out of the spiral with me? Well, then that's feedback. That's information about that person's willingness to follow through on a commitment. You're either not ready or your agreements aren't real. So if you are the dominant and your submissive refuses to come out of the spiral, well, she doesn't trust you enough to follow you. Or she does not yet have the depth of ability to let go, to submit or surrender to anyone at all. So the reality is you don't need to avoid conflict. You just need some sort of a ritual and a protocol that knows what to do when it shows up, and you need a mutual commitment to follow through on it. And when this is used well, conflict ends up, for us, it's become shorter, it's resolved more cleanly, it's less damaging, and it happens less frequently. Dawn feels safer to speak up and to speak honestly. I end up with a deeper sense of confidence in my own leadership. Being able to lead through an emotionally charged moment is a very affirming and powerful feeling, guys. It really is. And you end up with a dynamic that's strengthened and refined by the tension that you were afraid of. So a real authority transfer, power exchange dynamic doesn't mean you never break. It means that you have a structure to know how to come back. So the deepest question really is, will you both choose to honor the dynamic, not just when it's easy, but to also honor the dynamic when it's tense, when it's messy, when it's alive with friction? So again, You don't need to fear conflict. You need a process for repair. Reconnection isn't just emotional, it's structural. And the reason these dynamics spiral and eventually fail is because they don't have a plan for tension. So I've just given you one. Make it your own, and then lead through it as the dominant. Submit to it as the submissive. This is how you repair, and you plan for repair. So if there's one thing that I want you to take from this whole thing, is that disagreement, again, isn't a failure. It is a portal. It's an opportunity. It's not a sign something's wrong. It's not a red flag that the dynamic isn't working. It's just a reveal. It's just an opportunity. It's always asking, are you still in? Are you still choosing this? And are you still here with me? Conflict doesn't pull you out of your dynamic unless you allow it to pull you out of your dynamic. It's the avoidance, the collapse, the silence, or the discomfort with conflict that pulls you out of your dynamic. So, my fellow dominants, your leadership is not proven by how many times she obeys, regardless of how she feels. Your leadership is proven by how you show up when she says no, how you stay in the seat of your presence. To submissives, your devotion is not measured by how agreeable you are or by how faithfully you can abandon yourself. Your devotion is measured by your willingness to speak up, to speak truthfully, to speak with vulnerability, and to do so without trying to control the outcome. Because the relationship and the dynamic that you crave is not one without conflict. It's one where disagreement refines your roles and brings you deeper together. Every time you repair, every time you pause, speak truth, and return to each other, you're recommitting and you're deepening the dynamic. You're making it stronger. You're recommitting. So the next time you find yourself in disagreement, remember, this isn't the end. This is the opportunity for our relationship to be better. And if you let it, the moment will deepen everything. So if you're a part of a couple, you're listening to this maybe together, I want you to ask each other, what helps you feel safest to speak your truth even when it's hard? And what helps you trust me to lead? What helps you trust that I'm going to follow even when we're in disagreement? Because the strongest dynamics are not the ones with the least tension. They're the ones with the most trust. So thank you for joining me for this episode, and I would love to hear your comments. If you're watching on YouTube, please leave a comment, subscribe, and follow the YouTube channel. And also, you can leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple. It helps this podcast get out to more people, and it really helps me share this message of humanity and honest integrity in power exchange dynamics and how these can be extremely healthy, loving ways to relate to each other. So I appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate you listening and watching, and I'll be back next week.